Hey everybody, it's Raphael from XX Raphael Productions, and welcome to part 2 of the best Flash episodes. This, I'm gonna cover more of the Flash's great episodes, and if you want to see part 1, I have linked it down below in the description. But just as a quick summary, let's go ahead and say that for part 1, we did Out of Time, Enter Flash Time, Enter Zoom, Fast Enough, and The Speed of Thought. So without further ado, let's get into today's list of other great episodes from The Flash. And let's go ahead and start with Season 2, Episode 17, Flashback. So this episode follows the reveal of Zoom to Team Flash, where in the previous episode, Cisco vibes the helmet and they find out that Jay Garrick is actually Zoom. So the next episode, which is this episode right now, is centered around time traveling. So it is a time travel filled episode where Barry has to go back a year prior, so he goes back to 2015 because this Season 2 episode takes place in 2016, so he goes back a year prior to get help from the Reverse Flash himself in order to defeat Zoom in the present timeline, since Zoom is still way too powerful for the Flash to beat. So he decides that getting help from the Reverse Flash is the best option for this. So here in this episode we get some of the best scenes, like not just from this episode, but I think on the entire show in general, in which Barry has to force Thawne to help him solve the speed equation and somehow use it to improve his speed to surpass Zoom's level. Because like I said earlier, Zoom is still way too powerful since he has the Velocity 9 and he's also a more experienced speedster. So knowing that Thawne has solved the speed equation prompts Barry to get his help. So Barry tactfully lies to Thawne to force him to help, showcasing one of Barry's smartest moments. And not just that, but we also get some of the most nostalgic moments from Season 1, like Eddie Thawne before he died, and also the Season 1 version of our characters like Cisco and Caitlin. Because you can also get to compare the tone of Season 1 and compare it to the darker tone of Season 2 as well. So it was all just very intriguing to revisit. So aside from the fan service, it also serves to further the Zoom plot, so in this case they don't make the mistake of focusing too much on fan service, and it also still further progresses the main storyline. So this episode also served as the introduction to the Time Wraiths, whom humped speedsters that mess with the timeline. We got the Season 2 Barry versus Season 1 Barry moment, and we also got a ton of other cool scenes that put this episode up there. Great episode of Season 2 all around. So Season 2, Episode 17, Flashback. Now that we've got that wrapped up, let's go ahead and move on to Season 2, Episode 20, Rupture. So this episode is set up as the return of Barry's powers after he gave them up 2 episodes ago, so since this is Episode 20, he gave up his powers in Episode 18 versus Zoom in order to save Wally West's life. So this is also the episode where Henry Allen finally returns after a long time away from his son, in which Barry has some great scenes in regards to him wrestling with his decision to take the risk of letting the particle accelerator explode a second time. So he has to basically trust Harry's words in that he can contain the explosion, or he has to also wrestle with the decision to take down Zoom's metahumans without using his powers. Now, in regards to Zoom, I want to say he was an absolute force of nature in this episode, especially during the jitter scene where he basically massacres an entire group of policemen, Barry also vanishing at the very end of the episode. Great scenes, great soundtrack, very tense moments. And then to wrap it all up, this was also a heartfelt episode where it also served for Cisco and Dante's reconciliation, where they didn't really have any good moments back in the Season 1 because Dante and Cisco didn't really get along. So they reconciled a lot in this episode, and also we hadn't seen Dante in general since Season 1, so it was actually a surprise to have him back for this episode. So this is a great episode all around, full of action. Zoom was, I'd say that aside from Episode 6 and Episode 13, this was also Zoom at his best. He was at his most terrifying in this episode. Alright, so let's go ahead and cover a Season 3 episode, which is Infantino Street. Season 3, Episode 22. So this episode of Season 3 is the penultimate episode, and from the beginning it is already intense. in regards to the episode shoving it right in our faces at the very first moments, where this is basically the day that Iris is supposed to die and the clock is ticking. Team Flash has to scramble to find a solution since they're almost out of time to reverse this tragic event. So, undoubtedly the major highlight of this episode was the return of not only King Shark from Season 2, but even Captain Cold himself. So, it was great to see Captain Cold again after his death in Legends of Tomorrow, and also this version of Captain Cold agrees to help Barry steal a Dominator tech from Argus, and this leads to some hilarious moments between these two. Basically, the interactions with Captain Cold and Barry are always welcome. They're like some of the best actors anyway, so naturally their chemistry shines. So we get hilarious moments between the two, and especially when King Shark almost drags Captain Cold back to eat him, leading to an intense action sequence, alright? So that was great. All that action sequence was great, really, that entire mission. Now, character interactions throughout this episode was significantly better compared to the previous episodes of Season 3. Like, the episode in general, they really stepped their game up for this episode, because I think, like, the episodes leading to Savitar's reveal was dragging on. It felt boring, it just kept dragging on, but for this episode, they really stepped it up. It was great. Nothing felt like filler. The tone was good, actually. Like, we had Savitar tricking HR, Savitar destroying Wally in a fight, evil Barry revealing himself, and also the pacing was fairly well done, and the final scene in Infantino Street, like the actual event, was great, where Savitar kills Iris, whom actually was revealed to be H.R. Wells. So the soundtrack, the tension, the intensity, all in this episode's closing moments was definitely some of the best. So this puts Season 3, Episode 22 as one of the best episodes this show has delivered. Alright, so let's go ahead and cover an episode from Season 5 now. So, Season 5, Episode 8, and that is What's Past This Prologue. Now, this is particularly special because this is also the 100th episode of The Flash, and this also comes right before the crossover Elseworlds. Now, this episode's plot is actually fairly simple, so let's go ahead and summarize this up. Barry has to go get some technology from the past, which means traveling back to the events of Season 1, Season 2, and Season 3. Now, there was nothing important from the Thinker Saga in regards to what they were trying to achieve in Season 5, so they did not have to travel back to the events that took place in Season 4. So basically, the team's goal in this episode was to get whatever was necessary. Like I said earlier, he has to travel back to get some pieces of technology from the first 3 seasons in order to defeat the villain Cicada from the present timeline. We also got some awesome scenes regarding old villains being revisited, like Fawn, Zoom, Savitar, old moments like the particle accelerator exploding, which I think, in my opinion, this was the highlight of the episode. You want to know why? And also, because for me in particular, as a longtime fan of this show, you get to realize how far the show has progressed since the first episode, the pilot, and I also loved how it showed all of the old villains and heroes being affected by Reverse Flash, and how his particle accelerator exploded, along with all the cool references to past events in this show. Like, all of that was just a spectacle, and really, like, I think the only problem I had with this episode is the fact that Zoom was heavily underutilized, and Cisco breaching Cicada's dagger into outer space rather than breaching into another Earth was definitely a head scratcher. I have no idea why he did that, but I would say that the pros of this episode definitely far outweigh the cons, so I wouldn't really knock this episode out of the pedestal, okay? So, the ending plot twist, I will get into that right now, was also really good because it is revealed that Barry and Iris' daughter, Nora West Allen, is actually revealed to be working with the Reverse Flash, the one and only Eobard Thawne, who is actually now imprisoned in 2049's Iron Heights prison, and is served as an effective cliffhanger for the viewers to get very interested for the rest of Season 5's plot. So, well done for the 100th episode of The Flash. Now for the last episode of this video, it is Season 6, Episode 7, The Last Temptation of Barry Allen, Part 1. Now personally, I am of the opinion here that part 1 was significantly better than part 2. Now, I was not too much of a fan of the Bloodwork saga of Season 6, but I will give credit where credit is due and say that this episode was definitely a standout from that season. This episode was effective where it showed Barry trying to fight off Ramsey Rosso's aka Bloodwork's influence on him, along with some cool scenes that was clearly building up to Crisis on Infinite Earths, Barry actually using the vibrating hand on the Speed Force itself, which was one of the most epic moments of the entire episode, along with great acting from Grant Gustin, who really stepped up his game for this episode. He brought his A game for this. Now, Grant Gustin has had plenty of great moments, but this episode was one of the best. He acted his heart out and it showed. I also liked the way this episode was directed. It was kind of unique from the usual Flash episodes where it kind of gave a horror vibe in some moments. Like the episode progressed, and along with an ending twist to show that Barry had been infected, and that presented an interesting cliffhanger that would be resolved ultimately in the... However, I would say that this episode was resolved in part 2. It was unfortunately disappointing nonetheless, but that doesn't take away that part 1 was still one of the best episodes I've seen in this show. Alright, so that wraps up part 2 of the best Flash episodes, which covers Season 2, Season 3, Season 5, and Season 6. And if you have any more episodes that you want me to list for Part 3 or any future parts, feel free to comment that down below, and I will add your suggestions to my personal list as well. Like I said earlier, if you haven't seen Part 1 yet, it is linked in the description below, and hopefully you enjoyed Part 2. Raphael out, and I will see you soon.